Okay, folks, buckle up because we're diving into the thrilling world of trade deficits. In the simplest terms, it's like your buddy who keeps borrowing $5 for coffee but never pays you back. Except instead of $5, it's billions of dollars. And instead of your buddy, it's entire countries. Basically, a trade deficit means we're buying more stuff from other countries than we're selling to them. Think iPhones, cars, those little plastic toys your cat immediately destroys. We love our imported goodies. But when we import more than we export, boom, trade deficit. Now this might not seem like a big deal. Who doesn't love a good bargain, right? But like your friend who's always short on cash, constantly racking up these trade deficits can have some serious consequences for our economy. So, is it time to panic and start hoarding canned goods? Not quite. But understanding trade deficits is crucial because it affects everything from the price of your morning coffee to the strength of the American dollar. Stay tuned as we unpack this economic mystery. Now let's talk graphs, baby, not the kind your weird aunt posts on Facebook with inspirational quotes, but the ones economists obsess over. The Trade Balance Goods and Services, BOPGSTB graph. Catchy, right? This graph tells the story of America's love-hate relationship with international trade. We love to buy stuff from other countries, but we're not so hot on selling them things in return. Looking at the graph, you'll see a whole lot of red, which, in the world of economics, is rarely a good thing. This sea of red represents the US trade deficit, which has been steadily growing for decades. It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck, except the train is full of cheap electronics, and we're the ones inexplicably tied to the tracks. Sure, there are a few blips of black ink here and there representing those rare moments when our exports actually exceeded our imports. But for the most part, it's a one-way street to deficit city. So what does this graph tell us? Well, for starters, it means we're really good at consuming and not so great at, making things. But don't worry, we'll dig deeper into the reasons behind this trend later. Okay, so we buy more than we sell. Big whoop, right? Well, not so fast. Remember that friend who's always borrowing money? At some point, you start wondering if they'll ever pay you back. Same deal with trade deficits. Economists and politicians love to argue about whether trade deficits are good, bad, or just a tad unsightly. Some argue they're just a natural consequence of a strong economy, like a badge of honor for being the world's biggest consumer. But others warn that persistent trade deficits are like a ticking time bomb. They can lead to job losses in domestic industries, a weaker currency, and a mountain of debt to other countries. It's like racking up a massive credit card bill. Eventually the bill collector comes knocking. And let's not forget the political fallout. Trade deficits often fuel protectionist policies and trade wars, as countries try to protect their own industries and jobs. Remember the trade war with China? Yeah, trade deficits were the fuel on that dumpster fire. So, while some economists might shrug off trade deficits, it's clear they have real-world consequences that we can't ignore. Here's a question that keeps American workers up at night. Are cheap imports stealing our jobs? The answer, like most things in economics, is complicated. But let's just say there's a reason why Made in America has become a rallying cry. When we buy a mountain of cheap goods from other countries, it puts pressure on American businesses to compete. Sometimes that means cutting costs, which often translates to laying off workers. It's basic economics, folks. But that doesn't make it hurt any less if you're the one losing your job. Now, some argue that trade creates jobs too, and they're not wrong. When we export goods, it creates jobs in those industries. But the problem is, we're not exporting nearly as much as we're importing. So the net effect on jobs is still a big question mark. The truth is, it's hard to pinpoint exactly how many jobs are lost or gained because of trade. But one thing's for sure, the fear of job losses due to trade deficits is real, and it's a major driver of economic anxiety for many Americans. Section 5. Living on credit. Can we keep buying what we don't make? Every time we rack up a trade deficit, we're borrowing money from other countries to pay for imported goods. It's like using a credit card to fund your shopping addiction, except the credit card belongs to Uncle Sam. These debts don't disappear into thin air. Those countries lending us money expect to be paid back with interest. And how do we pay them back? We could export more goods, but we're not great at that. This debt weakens the dollar, making imports more expensive. It's a vicious cycle. Can we keep living beyond our means? Maybe for a while, but like any Ponzi scheme, it's not sustainable in the long run. Eventually the music stops, and someone's left holding the bag. And in this case, that someone might be us. Section 6. Trade wars, when deficits get political. Remember when we were kids and someone stole our favorite toy? We'd throw a tantrum, maybe try to steal it back. Well, trade wars are basically the adult version of that, except instead of toys, it's entire industries and billions of dollars at stake. Trade deficits often become a political punching bag. Politicians love to blame them for economic woes, promising to get tough on trade and bring back jobs. But like most things in politics, it's rarely that simple. Trade wars might sound good in a campaign speech, but in reality, they rarely work as intended. They often lead to higher prices for consumers, retaliation from other countries, and damage to the global economy. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It just makes things worse. So, while trade deficits can be a legitimate concern, resorting to trade wars is like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It's messy, ineffective, and ultimately hurts everyone involved. Section 7. The China Syndrome, a special case in trade imbalances. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say, the dragon in the room. China. No discussion about trade deficits would be complete without mentioning the country that's become synonymous with them. The US trade deficit with China is massive. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars every year. It's like China is running a fire sale on everything from iPhones to socks, and we just can't resist a good bargain. Now there are legitimate concerns about China's trade practices, like intellectual property theft and currency manipulation. But the truth is, the trade deficit with China is also a symptom of our own consumption habits. We demand cheap goods, and China is happy to supply them. The relationship between the US and China is complex, and the trade imbalance is just one piece of the puzzle. But it's a significant piece that has major implications for both economies and the future of global trade. Section 8. The strong dollar. A blessing and a curse for trade. Ah, the American dollar, the world's reserve currency. It's the envy of nations, the backbone of the global economy, and a total pain in the ass when it comes to trade. See, a strong dollar might sound like a good thing, and in many ways it is. It gives us more buying power overseas, makes imports cheaper, and makes us feel all smug and powerful. But here's the catch. It also makes our exports more expensive for other countries to buy. It's like trying to sell a hamburger for $5 when everyone else is selling theirs for $2. Sure, your burger might be made with Wagyu beef and artisanal cheese, but good luck finding buyers when there are cheaper options available. So, while a strong dollar might be good for consumers and tourists, it can be a real buzzkill for American businesses trying to compete in the global market. It's a classic economic dilemma. What's good for one part of the economy might not be so great for another. Section 9. Fixing the imbalance. Is there a magic button? So, we've established that trade deficits can be a problem, but how do we fix them? If only there were a magic button we could push, right? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to trade deficits. It's a complex issue with a tangled web of causes and effects. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. There are things we can do, both individually and as a nation, to address the imbalance. On a national level, we can promote policies that encourage domestic manufacturing and innovation, making our exports more competitive. We can also work towards fairer trade agreements that address unfair trade practices by other countries. But let's be real, folks, the government can only do so much. We, the consumers, have a role to play too. By making conscious choices about the products we buy and supporting American-made goods, we can help tip the scales in favor of a more balanced trade relationship. Section 10. The Consumer Conundrum. Our addiction to cheap imports. Let's face it, folks, we Americans love a good bargain. We're suckers for cheap clothes, electronics, and pretty much anything that promises to make our lives easier or more stylish without breaking the bank. But our insatiable appetite for cheap imports comes at a cost. Every time we buy a t-shirt made in Bangladesh or a smartphone assembled in China, we're feeding the trade deficit beast. We're essentially voting with our wallets, supporting foreign manufacturing over American jobs. Now, I'm not saying we all need to start wearing hemp clothing and churning our own butter, but we can all make small changes in our spending habits that can have a big impact. Supporting local businesses, buying American-made products when possible, and being mindful of our consumption habits can all make a difference. Remember, folks, every dollar we spend is a vote for the kind of economy we want to create. Section 11, the bottom line: deficits matter, but they're not the whole story. So there you have it, folks, the trade deficit dilemma in a nutshell. It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But one thing's for sure, trade deficits matter. They affect our economy, our jobs, and our relationship with the rest of the world. Ignoring them or pretending they're not a big deal is like ignoring a leaky faucet. Sure, it might not seem like a big deal at first, but over time it can cause serious damage. But here's the good news, we're not powerless. By understanding the issue, making informed choices as consumers, and advocating for smarter trade policies, we can work towards a more balanced and sustainable economic future. So, next time you're tempted by that ridiculously cheap imported gadget, remember the trade deficit and the impact your purchase has on the bigger picture. Because in the end, we're all in this together, folks, for better or for worse.